All right, so we have a lot to cover, so I'm going to get started on time here, and if people come in late, they can just kind of find a seat. So this is getting the most out of PHPStorm for Drupal 8. Obviously, with Drupal 8, it's all object-oriented. It's based on Symfony, so there's a lot of differences between Drupal 8 and Drupal 7, between procedural and object-oriented. So it really changes how you use your IDE and how effectively your IDE can make your day easier. So we're just going to go over a lot of the not basics, but more intermediary shortcuts and screens and things like Xdebug, things that aren't, you don't necessarily need, but make life easier. First, a little bit about me. I've been working at Digital Bridge Solutions for just over 2 years now. I'm a senior developer there, mainly focused on Drupal and recently Aura, which is also a Symfony-based platform. My Drupal name and GitHub name is Control-A-Del. The slides will be available later under my GitHub, and we're actually viewing the same slides that will be up there, so there shouldn't be any changes. I don't have a personal Twitter, but feel free to tweet my company, dbridge Chicago. If you feel like shouting out to us, or me, somebody will get it back to me. Now a little bit about you guys. So, how many of you are currently using PHPStorm? And how many of you currently have the Drupal code styles set for PHPStorm? Oh, that's not good. All right.
Is there? I feel like it asks you to set it.
If it always detects it, it will. Yeah.
It will.
But if it doesn't, you can also go in and set it manually.
Does what it provides actually meet all the? Do you know?
It meets the generic syntax standards, like spaces instead of tabs, 2 spaces instead of 4, new lines, new lines with brackets where there should be. So yeah, that's all good. How many of you are currently using Xdebug? All right, not as many people. And how many of you are using any kind of code testing, static analysis, or sniffing when you commit to your repos? All right, even fewer. So those are really nice. They keep repos nice and clean. And the most annoying part about using PHPStorm well is colleagues that don't use it well, because your ID starts looking really cluttered from people committing stuff that doesn't match what PHPStorm was expecting. And the automated code testing and sniffing just really helps with that, because it enforces those standards across the entire repo. All right, so plugins that I have in PHPStorm that we'll be seeing today: Git. I know a lot of people use Git on the command line. I personally do 80% of my Git through PHPStorm. I find the interface really intuitive, and it does all the easy things for me, so there's no reason to use the command line, really. .ignore. And .ignore grays out files that are ignored in the repo, so you know if you're editing something that isn't going to be committed. The Symfony plugin and the Drupal Symfony Bridge, both of these are plugins that make or integrate Symfony into PHPStorm and provide a lot of auto-completing, and I think it's mostly just auto-completing various scenarios. One note about these is the Symfony plugin does have to be turned on for every project. You can't just turn it on in PHPStorm, so you have to go in and turn it on every time. And we'll go over that once I get into PHPStorm. PHP annotations is required by Symfony, the Symfony plugin, and that provides autocompletes inside of the annotation blocks inside of Drupal 8. And Key Promoter X. So this is one I actually installed to help me with this presentation. What it does is anytime it sees you doing something that there's a shortcut for, it prompts you to use the shortcut. Well, it tells you that you could use the shortcut and how many times you've clicked instead of using a shortcut. So you'll see that popping up in the bottom right of my PHPStorm. So first, we're just going to do a quick Git overview. I'm not going to go into too much detail. And one note about this presentation: the slides are mainly for reference. Most of the value will be going through PHPStorm itself. So if you can't read something on the slide, don't really worry about it, because we'll be doing it in PHPStorm. So first, the tool window. So if you go to View, Tools Window, Version Control, it'll pop up a bottom window that shows all the Git information. So View, Tool Windows, Version Control. And you can see I have my Git history here for this repo. And if I click on one of the commits, it pulls up what's been changed, and we do Control D, it pulls up the diff for that specific file, and you can see I changed some text in here. It also lets you manage your branches, so see where your branches are, narrow it by branch. So that's a quick Git overview. It does merging and pulling and rebasing, all that good stuff. I do really enjoy the merge resolution because it does a 3-pane resolution where you get yours on the left, the server on the right, and you combine them in the middle. And it does the diff highlighting, like character by character, so it does this as well, where it highlights exactly what changed in the line, which makes it super easy to just click things over into the middle file and resolve everything. History, we went over. Local history. All right, so this isn't related to Git, but PHPStorm does track the local file changes as you make them. So if you know you have a good state in your file somewhere and you've changed a bunch of things and you can't remember how far back you have to go with undo, you can open up local history, show history, and these are all the various changes I've made over the past hour getting ready for this presentation. This has been a bit finicky for me between sessions. So if PHPStorm closes unexpectedly, or it runs out of memory, or something like that, this sometimes disappears, so don't rely on it entirely. But it's a really great reference point for if you knew you had something working at some point and you just want to go back to it. And you can see this goes back all the way to yesterday at 10:17 when I created the repo. Diff, we went over. Like I said, that's Control D on any blue or green file in the local changes here. We'll open up the diff. You can also right-click and open the local history and the diff. Linting and sniffing. So this is probably one of the most useful things to really get you in tune with what the Drupal coding standards really are, because it'll really complain to you that you're doing something wrong. Right now, so phpcs is PHP Code Sniffer, which enforces the sniffing standards for Drupal. If you download the Drupal Coder module, I believe it has a PHPCS rule setting for Drupal, which is great, and I've linked to the installation instructions. They're fairly simple, but a little bit involved with Composer and symlinking and that kind of stuff, so I won't go over it in detail, but we can see right now I have some pretty basic issues with this file. Let me drag this. So like, it's telling me I'm not declaring a method I need to, and I believe that's the only issue it's showing me. And I have some typos. But if I go to settings, languages, PHP. So this is the wrong area for sniffing, but Symfony. To turn on, you just go here. So PHP, Symfony, enable. And make sure to change your web directory. Some hosts do web, some do dockroot. Aqua does dockroot. This is an Aqua site, so I've set mine to dockroot. No sniffer. Editor, code style. Nope. Here we go. Editor, code style, inspections. PHP Code Sniffer. So once you install Coder correctly, Drupal will pop up here. Just select that. Some people like to set this as error instead of warning, but I personally like to leave error for things that actually break the site and warning for things that are nice to fix but not necessary. So we turn that on, and you can see right now it's complaining that I'm exceeding the line length limit. It's complaining that there must be no blank line after an inline comment. It should be complaining that there's no new line found. So really, this is all syntactical stuff, but it cleans up the code and makes it a lot easier to look at. So if we get rid of that, break this up. And it's telling me to do that. All right. We still have 6-week warnings found. What else do we got? Those tell me this is indented correctly. And that it should be like that. There we go. And we need our new line. Alright, that's good enough. So if we get rid of this, because we'll use that later, you can see this looks a lot prettier than when we started, and PHPStorm is obviously a lot happier. It is a bit more obvious if you're using a darker theme where the weak warnings are, because they're highlighted in yellow. By default, day to day, I have a very dark theme, but white is better contrast for the projector. Style linting, so you can do PHP code linting, and then there's SCSS and less and SAS linting. Style lint is the Drupal standard as of 8.4. It's not available, like when there's tests run on themes and contrib modules, it's not currently available, but there's an issue for it, so it will be there eventually. And you can install a module for style lint or a plugin for style lint that'll highlight all your SCSS issues according to the style lint settings. Personally, as a front-end developer, I don't have a good feeling for the defaults, so it's nice to get yelled at when I write a class name wrong or use a hex instead of a variable. ESLint is the same thing, but for JavaScript. I don't write that much JavaScript, so I haven't actually set it up, but it is available. And SASLint, which is the one we actually have installed on our sites. It's the same as StyleLint, just an alternative. And I don't think I have an SCS file ready, but you can see right here, right? So color is complaining about something. Field set, and like right here it's complaining there's not going to be a space between these, or that there's not a space between these. And really, it's the same thing as PHP. It just keeps your style sheets nice and clean and looking uniform. Navigating code. All right, so this is where a lot of the nice day-to-day things really are. Linting is great. It makes your repo look nice and clean, but it's really just extra work. Navigating code actually gets you the answers for your questions. So searching everywhere, you can do shift. If we want to look up like a content entity, the content entity class, and go to that base class and open it up. Nice and quick. Hierarchy view. So if you're writing a block class or a block for the first time and you want to find examples of another block, you can go to this block base, which the class is extending, do Control H, and it will pull up all the other classes that are extending this one. So this is a great way to find examples of things already being done inside of Drupal. It's like the help block. It's obviously doing quite a bit more than we're doing. And it's got quite a bit more logic inside of our build. But maybe that would be useful for us if we're actually building a complex block. And you can see that it will even do like the hierarchy. So this view's block base is extending the base, or is extending block base, but then there's other classes that extend this one. So it's showing you that hierarchy inside the hierarchy, which is nice. And you can always open up with the base one if you want to see it. So copying paths, obviously, sometimes you need to share a line of code with somebody on your team to get their opinion or for them to check something out. You can do Control-Shift-C to get the full path to the file, or you can get Control-Shift-Alt-C will get you path plus the line number. And that's just real simple. Select the for each, Control-Shift-Alt-C. And there we go. That's the relative path in the repo, which is super handy for just pasting to Slack and being like, can you check this out, or is this where I want to be? Function definitions. So one of the first things I was really annoyed about with Drupal 8 is you go and look at a class and like most of it's add inherit doc. And that doesn't mean anything to me. But if you press Control Q on this, it'll just pop up the documentation. But I don't have this name correctly. Alright, there we go. So now it's giving us the documentation for whatever the build documentation is actually found, which is great. And you can also do this on function calls. So if we uncomment this, and do Control Q, it'll tell us what this function is doing immediately in the code. I don't have to go look it up. And it'll tell me, it should give me a link to open it. Yeah, it'll tell me where it is right here. So that's pretty useful. Going to the function declaration, so let's say you did pull up the documentation and it wasn't enough for you and you actually want to go to the function. You can do Control B or Control click will get you to the same place. And then, right, you're actually where the function is defined. You can see the code, you can see what it's doing, and if it's what you want it to be doing, or if it's going to return what you want it to return. So it's a nice way to quickly open up the code that's actually being run. Find usages. So that was finding where the function is defined, but if you want to find all the usages of that function, you can do Alt F7. And this one's going to return a bunch. But you can see it said, here's the method we looked up. Method calls 137 in these various files. And that wasn't the best example because this one only has method calls. But it'll sort out what the different usages are in here. So like the other one is like in comments, which is useful. So if you're looking for where it's called, it'll be in method calls. If you're looking for it in comments, it'll be in comments. If you're looking for it like in a string, it'll be in a string. So it breaks it out for you instead of just giving you a list of everything, you know, as it found it. Most actions you can Alt Enter, so it's not always easy to know what's available in PHPStorm. So if we go back to our base block and we do like an Alt Enter here, it'll ask me to generate a Symfony service. I didn't know PHPStorm would do that for me, but that's cool. If we go here, right, so it'll convert the string, inject language, replace quotes. Let's do that. Alright, so this will take me to the setting to change things for double quotes to single quotes, apparently. And this little light bulb kind of does the same stuff. So add php.comment. So I can say it's a string. That's not really useful, but if this was like an entity, you could say this is an entity of block or type block, and then it would start auto-completing functions for you, actually. So this is wrong because markup is not a block, but PHPStorm thinks it is. So if we do markup, now we're getting all the functions for block. tighten that up a little bit. Gutter icons. It took me a while to find this one, but they are fairly useful. The three I've seen is I, O, and H. I is implement, so it shows implementations of parent methods or children implementing a method. So build. All right. The other one is O, which shows if a method is overriding a parent or is overridden by a child, and you can tell based on the arrows, up or down. In this screenshot, there's an arrow down here, an arrow up here. These are both O. This one is an I with an up arrow. And the third one is H, which is hooks. Not as relevant in D8, but still kind of relevant. It'll show you all the hook implementations, and it'll also show you where the hook is defined, so you can open that up easily. So here, build is overriding the base build. And you can see these are all the classes that implement the build method. And if we open up a module file, so we have our hook help, and we can go up to, so it'll show us where the hook is invoked, and also show us the documentation. And you can click on any of those to open it up. It's a real quick way to kind of get to the definitions of hooks or seeing if something's being overridden or implemented. Code completion and boilerplates. So navigating code is fun, but eventually you do have to write it, and with Symfony comes a bit of boilerplate code and a bit of guessing at what the name of things are, and PHPStorm will help with that. So first of all, I recommend Drupal console. It's great for generating things. There's a lot of generation commands. It doesn't have everything, but it covers a lot. It'll generate an entity. I want to say it'll generate a form. It'll write a lot of code for you that you don't necessarily need to know how to write unless you really want to. So, implement interface methods. So, block-base at some point extends or implements an interface class saying it needs this build method. So if we delete this and we do Control-I, it'll say we should implement the build method. Or these are all that kind of default object ones that you can implement. Or there's a translate apparently trait that we could implement here. So if we click this, we have a couple settings here. Maybe I can shrink this. There we go. So add PHP doc, default, copy from base class, or add inherit doc. I like the third one. And it just puts the stuff in for us. But that's pretty useful, right? If you don't know all the methods you can implement, just press Control-I, and it'll show you what's available from the other classes. The other alternative to that is, if we delete this again, this is now complaining that it's not implementing all the methods we need for extending this class. So if you press Alt-Enter, it'll add all the method stubs for us. And this one's a bit annoying because it gives you the full documentation, but that's to help you write it. So this could put in 10 different stubs for you, and if you don't know what they all do, having the documentation there is going to be handy. And once you're done, you can just go add inherit doc. And that's that. Use statements. If you autocomplete things in PHPStorm, it'll add your use statement for you. So, block base, you can see use popped up here, which is pretty cool. But say you copy some code in from Stack Overflow or something, and it doesn't put the use statement in. If we get rid of this, do an Alt-Enter, it'll ask us to import the class, and it just kind of assumed the one we wanted. But if there's options, it'll give you a drop down to pick which one you actually want to use. And we undo a bunch of stuff. All right. So what I've done is I just removed the full class name, and now it just says block. So it's going to ask me to import the class block. All right, so we have this up here now, and it says it's unused. And that's because this actually isn't using block, it's just kind of type hinting. And if we get rid of this entirely, it'll still say unused. So we know we can safely delete this because you don't actually use it inside of your code. Autocomplete options. So this is by far one of the most handy things when it comes to services and annotations, and those are the two main areas that I use them for. So you have a service, and we have one here, and it'll tell you what the argument's supposed to be from the declaration of the class. And if you kind of do an @ and a control space, it'll pull up every possible option for you, and there's tons of them. But you can see we're looking for an entity type manager interface, so it's kind of PHPStorm has guessed at which ones we actually want here. So we want entity type manager service, and it will do the same thing for tags. So there's a bunch of different tags that you can use. This one's supposed to be event subscriber. Let's say you didn't know that. You can control space, and because I used it recently, it's at the top here. But that won't always be the case. And just like services, there's a bunch of them to choose from. So this is kind of a great way to discover what the valid options are for these areas if you don't necessarily know what you're supposed to be putting in there. Or maybe, you know, you're referencing something it's not exactly the same. Because like entity type manager has changed. I think in the earlier versions of Drupal 8, it was just entity manager, and then they changed it to entity type. And there's just a small name change, but it can really throw off, like if you're reading older questions or documentation. So event subscriber, and that's that. The other useful part of auto-completing is annotations. So with a block, we have to define our annotations. If you have no idea what's supposed to go in here, you can do control space, and it'll pop up the ones that are supposed to be in here. So we need an ID. PHPStorm, and we need an admin label. So that's another great way of discovering valid options for this annotation block, because that can always be difficult to kind of figure out what goes there. Got covered annotation blocks. Covered. All right. So we did the services file earlier. Now in this Git container or container Git, we can also autocomplete all available services. So once again, great if you kind of have an idea of what you want but don't know the exact name. Refactoring class names. So if you decide you want to change your class name after you've written it and maybe used it in a couple other places in code, because file names do actually kind of matter with classes, you can right click, refactor, rename, and we do like custom PHPStorm block, and that's going to bother me. There we go. So that's what I'm renaming my class to. Hit enter, and it'll ask me to rename the file, and it'll also update any of the use statements inside the code. I don't have any for this one, but it will do that. So if you refactor your classes, you don't have to go kind of looking through your code and making sure you catch everything. It'll do it for you, which is really nice. And that's something that's available for methods as well. Like if I rename this to build broken, because it'll be broken, it'll go look for all the usages inside the code. Anytime like that class is used explicitly, it'll look up the build function and rename it to build broken. But there aren't any, it's not going to find any. And inside of a method, it'll do that for variables as well. So I keep right clicking, but you can shift F6 and it'll do that for inside the method where it's context, like where that variable is being used within this context. So if you want to kind of clean up your code or change the naming to make more sense, PHPStorm will make your life a lot easier and update everything for you. It's pretty handy. Alright, and refactoring, that's just the screen we went through where it'll show you everything it's going to refactor and why. And on to Xdebug. So this is the really fun one. My recommendation for configuring Xdebug is to use something that sets it up for you. I personally use Drupal VM. I believe Lando will set it up for you. Aqua Dev Desktop, I'm not sure. Most of the Docker images I've seen also come with Xdebug. It's really handy, but it's kind of a pain to set up on the server, so I would recommend using something that sets it up for you. Enabling Xdebug once you do have it on the server. There's two parts. You need a browser extension to send the right Xdebug headers to PHPStorm, and you need PHPStorm listening for those headers. So we've got my company website here, and we've got the extension, and you can see I've turned on Xdebug. If I turn it off, this little bug goes gray. And in PHPStorm, we've got this little phone here. So with the red and the green, that's not listening, and now we're listening. And if you click in the gutter to set a breakpoint, hey, I broke something. Failed to open required. Oh. It did not like me renaming this. Cool. Well, I knew this was working before the presentation. So, which one do we want? This one. Revert. Alright, looking kind of ugly, but it should work. And there we go. Alright, we got Xdebug. So, when it hits the breakpoint here, it will stop and show you all the variables available. It'll show you a call stack over here, and any watches you have set here. So you can see we have this markup variable, and in here, markup value right here. And then this with all the default Drupal, Symfony stuff, and server information, cookie, server session, all that good stuff. This is really handy for stopping right at a very specific point and finding out the value. So instead of having to do a DPM and refreshing the page and seeing what it dumps out, you just kind of hit the breakpoint here, and you're done. And the next part is you can set multiple, and as it goes through the code, it'll stop at all of them. So like, if you want to see, well, the value is here before a loop, and then you stop it immediately after the loop to see what the value is. That's one page call instead of doing that 2 or 3 times with DPM. So on the left here, there's a couple of different actions. Resume is it will just send the program off running again. Stop will stop debugging and just kill the page request, so that will like 404, 500 the window in the browser. This one shows you all your breakpoints in the code, and you can manage them from here. This will pause execution, or pause breakpoints. This is a super dangerous button that can kill a lot of time. So when you click this, Xdebug will not stop on any of your breakpoints in your code. And the only real notification you have is that they turn gray, and this box is outlined in the shadow. More than once, I have turned this on and then been wondering why Xdebug is not stopping at my breakpoints. It's not a fun experience. So we'll turn that back on, and these get into window settings for Xdebug. Then on the right here, we have a couple of different ones. Debugger is this window. Console, you can run some commands literally at this point in time in the code. What was this one? Show execution point. So that will take you back to the breakpoint if you navigate to some code and you're not really sure where you've stopped. Step over will take you to the next step in the code without it, like, it'll just take you to the next step as if there was a breakpoint there. So if we click step over here, this is what's called after the build function completes and returns. Unset build hashtag block. Step into, we'll go into the line you're at. So when I click into this, we're going to go into the unset function. Or not. Alright, so if I click this, we'll go into the if function. And it's checking, right, is empty. So because we have this not element, it calls is empty on content. And now we're in the is empty function. And we can still see the values for this function. So elements, and it's checking if there's anything in here, which there is. For step into, I haven't had a lot of luck in, but this will take you into, so let's say that we're here and we want to go into here regardless of the condition. You do for step into, and it should take you into there. I don't use it all that often. I usually just hard code the conditions if I want to get into the block, but it can be useful. And step out will take us back. So where did that take us to? Yeah, so you can see we were at the is empty, and step out took us to the next line in the if statement instead of taking us further into this, right? So we could have gone into count or array keys or empty. So Xdebug is like step debuggers are super powerful for helping you navigate the code and seeing the actual values that are being interpreted at the specific times they're being interpreted. Now let's say you have a loop though, and like you have 1,000 calls or 1,000 things that you're looping over. Well, you don't want to press resume 1,000 times to get to the 500th one, which is the problem. So at your breakpoint, you can right click. You can turn them off and suspend them individually, but you can also write just like simple if condition. It's like empty markup. So this will only stop on this breakpoint if markup is empty, which is useful if you're trying to figure out, if the markup's empty and it's not returning anything, and that's why this block isn't showing up. So we'll resume and let the page finish loading, and we'll just set this to empty, an empty string. And we'd expect this to stop now because it is empty. So because I took too long in the Xdebug, the browser interpreted it as a 504, so it's taking too long to respond. This is fairly normal if you really get into your sessions. It's just kind of part of life. You do have to refresh. All right, so it stopped because markup's empty. And if we put the string back, it's yelling at us. Line 26. Unexpected syntax. Alright, so that time we did not stop an Xdebug because the string is not empty. So yeah, that condition is super useful if you're going through loops or have kind of complex conditions where you want it to stop if it's only breaking and not every other time. Because there's loops and there's also functions that get called like 100 times in page build, and you don't want to stop at all 100 and try to figure out which one you need to actually stop at. Setting breakpoints, right? You can right click in the gutter, or left click in the gutter, and that will set the breakpoint. Xdebug interface we went over. Evaluating code. So I got rid of the condition. If I refresh the page. So when you're stopped, you can run any code you want. And I typically do it through right-clicking in here, evaluate expression, and you can literally run anything. So if we just want to get the value of markup, which is fairly simple, whatever. If we want to do like Drupal get container, and we want to get some container, I don't actually know one off the top of my head. Maybe. Nope, it doesn't like it. But you can write any code you want in here and get the value out. It doesn't have to be related to where you're stopped at all. You have the full Drupal bootstrap. It'll return whatever it would return if you wrote it in the code. So this is useful if you're trying to like figure out how to navigate an entity, or you're trying to figure out if you need a toString or a value function, because you can just check immediately, like try it 3 or 4 times without repeating the or refreshing the page and stopping or changing your code. So that's evaluating expressions. The other thing you can do is actually change the value of your variables. So if I right click and do set value, I've just added some text to the markup string. So now when we hit resume, we're going to see that text on the page. Even though the code hasn't changed in PHPStorm, it showed up on the page because we changed it mid-process. So if you literally want to make a live edit and see, well, what would happen if this value was this instead of this, just do it in there, and it will evaluate as if that's what happened before you got to that breakpoint. Vendor mapping. So this is a word of warning. Vendor isn't always mapped if you're trying to set breakpoints inside a vendor. So like inside of Symfony, or I don't think there's an issue. It might be an issue with Drupal modules, but I don't remember. Anyways, if you go to settings, not version control, where do we want to go? Languages and frameworks. PHP, debug, nope. Servers. So here you can see there's some mapping information. This is the local domain that I'm using. And then we have the file directory. So this is in PHPStorm. And this is the path to it on the server. So, like, because PHPStorm won't always make the connection to vendor correctly, I can set this to /var/docker/vendor, and that'll make sure that when Xdebug is running, it knows where to find the code, and it'll hit the breakpoints inside that code. Otherwise, the mapping could not be set, and then Xdebug doesn't know where to stop. So if you ever get a message in the right, or maybe it'll show me if I refresh. So when that happens, I don't have one here. It'll pop up an error message that says files may not be mapped correctly, and that's when you want to go in and make sure you're mapping the breakpoint files correctly. It'll also show up in this variables thing if you set a breakpoint beforehand. And that's just one of those gotchas that's nice to know about why breakpoints aren't being hit inside a vendor. Any questions on Xdebug? Because that's a very tough topic. Yes?
This might be related to my Lando configuration, but when I try to set it up, I've had a situation where I was using configuration for a new site that was the same as the old, though, just with the updated site name and everything. Mm-hmm. And it wouldn't start for like 3 hours. Like I just gave up on it. I went and did something else. I came back and suddenly Xdebug was like working. Does it take a lot of memory, or like what?
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. So Xdebug does slow down PHP, and in extreme cases, I haven't heard it 3 hours, but it has turned like a minute call into a 5-minute call, or a minute call into a 10-minute call. And what I've noticed most is it depends on the number of PHP files it's trying to get through. And typically, there's not really a good answer to that because you are using a debugging tool. It's going to slow things down. But it's good to know that like if your local slow and you're not using Xdebug, turn it off. But you do have to like go into PHP, like php.ini settings, and actually turn it off. You can't just turn off the browser extension and PHPStorm because it'll still be running on the server or like on your site. So yeah, if you're having performance issues, Xdebug could be a culprit. So this is kind of a bonus section, patching. So with D8, there's still a lot of active development going on, which means sometimes you need to apply patches to your code base from contrib or core, and PHPStorm will do that for you. I do highly recommend it, like if you're going to be patching things, to use the Composer Patches package. And what that does is, in your composer.json, you can define patches to apply to your code base when you do composer install. And you can either define like a local path to the patch, or just a Drupal, like a URL to a Drupal patch on Drupal.org. So it's super useful. And it's a great way to make sure the patches you apply actually apply every time somebody installs a repository. But if you're just trying out a patch, PHPStorm will allow you to apply the patch either from your clipboard or if you select it. I don't think I have one in my code base that I could apply. Well, let's take a look. I don't see one here. Let's take a look at our composer.json. Yeah, so we don't have any patches on the site at the moment. But if I had a patch to apply, you do apply patch, and it'd pick up a patch from in here and apply it to the right code base. So you could take one for like the address module in Drupal, and it would find address module in your repository and apply it and tell you what's going to change and if it can apply it successfully. So it's a great way to test out patches really quickly. You don't really have to worry about using Git to apply them. PHPStorm will just kind of do it for you, even if you just copy it straight out of the Drupal.org issue queue and into your clipboard. The other thing is sometimes you have to write patches for contrib modules or core to fix errors that you're running into but aren't resolved yet. The fastest way I've done to do this, like as a hacky, get the site working, not necessarily how you should be developing contrib or core, is install the module from source, which is composer install with the preferred source. And what this will do is it will clone the repo down to the site, or down into it will clone the module repo into your code base. And then in PHPStorm, you can set it up as a sub Git repository. So all the changes in that folder structure will be tracked in your Git changes. So they would show up in this version control, like if I started editing. All right, so we got Honeypot here. So right now, if I change anything in Honeypot, this is not a good example because this repo is tracking this folder. All right, new repository. So there's a couple things we can show you here. Composer.json, we have a bunch of patches. All right, so we have a lot of patches for this repository. And honestly, we probably don't need this many at this point, but as you can see, there's no limit. So you can see that .ignore is now showing us like these are all grayed out because they're not being tracked, which is super useful. And if I want to actually change something, it's not going to tell me that anything changed because, well, it's not tracking it. But if we go, yeah. Valid argument. Oh. Let's see how this goes. Alright. So this should be a repository now. If I go to version control. You can alright, so I've done this for commerce. So let's go into the commerce module. Commerce. So now if I start deleting things, it should tell me. Alright, this isn't working as well as it should. The joys of live demos. Anyways, if we follow the steps and not do it on the fly, it will show you the Git changes inside of PHPStorm to modules you've installed with the preferred source, and you can add them as sub-Git repositories. And the benefit to that is when you make your changes, you can just create your patch directly from inside your site repository. And either you can upload them to d.o then, or you can just put them in your patches folder, which we've done a couple times on this site. So we have a patches directory at the top level. And some of these we've written ourselves, some of these we took from other resources, but most of them were written by adding module as a sub-Git repository inside PHPStorm and just writing it directly in there. The other useful thing is if you're debugging a module and you're trying to keep track of the changes you have made, this is another great way to do it because it tracks it in Git and you can revert it. Otherwise, you're just kind of editing a flat file and you have to do a composer install to get back to the default state. Alright, so that's kind of a quick patching, or how I do patching in PHPStorm. PHPCBF is PHP code beautifier, and what this does is it'll actually go through and automatically fix your code sniffing issues. The setup is a bit involved. It is nice though, and it'll show you a nice little message. Let's see if I have it working. So I don't think it's on the screen with this many tools. External tools, here we go. So it wasn't that useful. You can see it said fixing file 0 so it was useful. So it fixed 9 things. It didn't fix all of them. But if we run it again, alright, I'm just going to the external tools again. There we go. Yeah, so it didn't find any fixable ones because it corrected 9 the first time. It's a useful tool if you're trying to update a lot of code at once. I would say it's not as useful if you're writing good code the first time because it's easier just to fix it. And you can set it to do either sync a file or a whole directory, which is why I said it's really good for bulk updating or fixing your code. And other things PHPStorm will do, it does composer management to some extent. Never tried it, but it has told me multiple times when I open up PHPStorm that it'll manage composer for me. And PHPStorm will run Drupal tests if you set it up correctly. And Matt Gleiman, who is here, has a plugin for running tests because Commerce has a bunch of tests in it. Once again, not something I do a lot, but it can be set up. And questions? Yes.
Do you ever click on a directory and then go up to, I think it's edit and refactor code?
Yeah, so you're talking about if we undo the PHP CBF stuff and do reformat code. Yeah, that does a very similar thing, but it won't take the code sniffer settings. It's just kind of the settings inside of PHPStorm. So when you go to settings, editor, code style, so it's only applying like the stuff in this area and not the code sniffer settings. Any other questions?
Can you do a demo of just a quick one of the debug console? As much time as I've spent in the debug thing, I've never used the console.
I think I've used it once or twice, but it's literally just for running PHP code.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Kind of like the whole evaluate expression.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's very similar. I just kind of like the evaluate expression interface more. Yeah. Does anybody like something in PHPStorm that I didn't cover?
There's I use shift to search for how you landed on a class. There's actually a class specific search.
Is there?
I think it's Control Shift O, maybe.
Control Shift O. Nope.
Control Shift something.
I know there's Control Shift N, which will let you search by file name, so that could be useful. Control Shift C. Nope. Oh, that reminds me though. If you go to help, there's a key map reference in here, which opens up a PDF file of a bunch of key map references. Control N. Yeah. Yep. All right, I guess one more thing. Up here, if you're trying to navigate, so let's say we do Control Shift N and we go to the entity class. That's great. We've opened up that one file, but it is not open on the left here in your entity or in your structure. So if you actually want to get to these files up here, you click, and you can open up any of the files in the same directory, or you can double click and it'll open up on the left. So if you're trying to get some context and you have the file open, it'll navigate to the code for you. All right, that's all I have. We got 2 minutes. Question?
I don't know if you looked at any like Twig or CSS, but it's got some kind of cool for that, like CSS and like color picker for hexes.
Yeah.
And in Twig or HTML, it actually gives like a little rainbow sort of like like as you go into the HTML.
Let's see if I can get the right directory here. It's custom. Oh. Yeah.
There you go.
So it'll show you the colors when you define them. It's also got the picker. And we have any twig here. Templates. It will do some auto-completing of functions available, or filters. And that's with the control space as well. So yeah, PHPStorm also is very powerful inside of Twig. All right, that's the session.